If our staff can take their seat, please. So we'd like to begin our meeting, and it is an exciting day at the City of Ottawa today. It's called budget table this morning. So we'll be on time to join our colleague downstairs at 10 o'clock. So we're not going to need all this time, and I advise you not to look at the clock behind you because it's wrong timing. So I'd like to call this meeting to order for Wednesday, November 8, 2017. This is a special meeting for tabling our police budget for 2018. Item of business is just a draft operating and capital budget presentation. On the agenda, is it Kerry? Okay. So I will turn this to the chief to introduce his team, and we'll begin.
Good morning, Mr. Chair and fellow board members. It's a pleasure for me to be here this morning to present our 2018 budget to the Police Services Board. Before I start, I just want to acknowledge the support of my executive, our senior leadership team, and Deborah Fraser and her entire finance team that worked diligently over the past number of months to prepare this budget. It wasn't an easy budget to prepare. Lots of discussions, lots of options, but more importantly, solutions to be able to meet the board's targets. So we're pleased to present to you our plan. So today I'll give you a presentation over the context of our operational priorities from a policing perspective. We'll present the 2018 draft operating budget, and as we do, as recommended by the Auditor General, we always present a three-year forecast. This year will be 2019 to 2021, and we'll talk to the draft capital budget for 2018, and finally just the timetable as far as some of the dates that are left to accomplish. So if we can move along with the slides. So as you well know, the City of Ottawa has a large geography and presents over 2,700 square kilometers to police. So for us to be effective in delivering police services to this wide city, we've developed a service delivery model that's adaptive and has different styles of policing to meet the needs of the rural community, the suburban community, and the urban community. 80% of our city is rural, making it travel distance and very more challenging. And just as the crow flies, it's 83 kilometers from east to west. So, Mr. Chair, you know, I've had this slide up before, but I think it's an important reminder that our community is changing and it's become more and more diverse. You know, as a police service, we want to continue to be reflective of the community we are serving, but also responsive to community. So, from a gender perspective, from a diversity perspective, we've done a lot of work to ensure that we continue to make sure that the Ottawa Police Service is an equitable workforce. And we continue to revitalize our outreach recruitment plan to make sure that we are attracting and retaining qualified candidates that are reflective of our community. From a crime and disorder perspective, we see crime trends continuing to shift. We have seen over the past 2 years a shift with respect to an increase in violence, and that is a trend that's taking place across the country. We've also seen an increase in social disorder issue, calls dealing with mental health. So for calls for service dealing with non-criminal matters, and the estimate is about 30% of the calls for service we deal with are actually criminal matters, 70% are non-criminal. So it's an important a reminder that the work of our police officers is challenging, it's diverse, and very complex to deal with. We've got some new legislation that continues to be introduced, and we saw then the legislation being tabled for the legalization of marijuana. That's going to have an impact from an operational perspective at the police service. We've got a new oversight legislation that was tabled just 2 weeks ago, a new Police Services Act, the continuing discussion around use of force and de-escalation training. So all those things put more demands on our police resources for services and for training. The expectations of the community continue to grow as we have more pressure to increase accountability to the board and to the community. So all these are resulting in some additional budget pressures, and as I said, policing is becoming a more complex profession. So that's why we've had to change and adapt our service delivery model to become more effective and efficient. And these are some of the things that we've done and that some of the major projects that we have underway to make sure that we are providing an effective service to our community. We see the service initiative is the way we are delivering our new service delivery model, and it focuses on core policing duties and puts officers where we need them, when we need them. The multi-year action plan is a culmination of a number of initiatives that we have on our plate to make sure that we, as a police service, we are delivering a bias-neutral police service. Recognizing the impact and the toll that police work has on our people, we've developed a comprehensive wellness strategy to make sure that our officers are taken care of. That includes introducing the R2MR training, peer support program, expanding the Real U program, and making a significant not only capital investment in our people, but from a human resources perspective, really having a focus to make sure that we are supporting our people as they do this very difficult job. We also want to make sure that all women have access to equal opportunities for transfers and promotions. And the gender audit that you're familiar with resulted in a number of policy changes that we've implemented, and also a shift and a move in our culture in policing around making sure that everybody has access to equal opportunities. I'm proud of the work that we have done with respect to the gender audit. We are leading this field in policing, and we continue to move forward to make sure that the project turns into a program. And as always, we're always trying to leverage technology to support our members, and I thank the board for recognizing and for supporting the investment that we are making in our modernization roadmap to make sure that we are accessing the tools that are out there, and that our officers have access to the best technology to make sure that they stay safe, but also that they have the ability to solve and ideally prevent crimes that are taking place in our community with information, access to information. And the board will also know that we want to make sure that we have the facilities in place to support, to deliver services to our community, but also to make sure that the men and women of the police service have access to space to do their work. And that's why you've seen the facility strategic plan, and you'll see in the capital projects that there's a significant investment in facilities this year because of the development of our South Campus facility. From a crime statistics perspective, criminal code offenses are up for a second year in a row. We've seen serious violent crimes rise, and however, the officers of the police service and the civilian members continue their hard work to hold offenders accountable and to arrest and charge individuals responsible for these crimes. From a property crime perspective, we've seen those levels remain stable. But because of the increase in serious violent crimes, our crime severity index has increased slightly here in our community. And again, that's a similar trend that we're seeing in large urban centers. And as I mentioned before, from a social disorder perspective, we're seeing that type of call for service increase in our community. And I want to acknowledge and thank again the board for approving our staffing plan, which falls into its final year. As a reminder, the police service did not grow in numbers from 2011 to 2015. We did replace all retiring members. However, there's no additional growth. In 2016, we began to address some staffing shortages that were being experienced across the police service. And the total investment of resources that finishes in 2018 was 75 new police officers. And those officers, 50 of them have been deployed to focus on frontline resources, the DART team, youth, and some developmental positions to make sure that the front line is better equipped to deal with the calls for service that they're dealing with. We're also addressing the pressures with respect to accommodation issues that our police service and other police services are facing, and the staffing plan also supports the goals that we've identified under the gender program. In addition to the 75 new police officers that we committed to. We also endeavored to find 25 positions internally to reallocate, and I'm pleased to report that we have identified those resources and they have been reassigned. And some of those officers went to our new operations center, focused on also human trafficking, sexual assault, child abuse, and partner assault. And the latter of those sections all deal with one of our operational priorities that deals with combating violence against women. So it's aligned with that priority. There are broader efficiencies and movement of people that we achieved under the service initiative, and you'll see those the results being reported on our annual report under on the service initiative. And it really helped us achieve the goal of putting people in the right place to do the important work and from a priority perspective. I'll turn now over to Director General Fraser and our CFO Jeff Lacerdo and Wally Salem from our Finance Department to continue on with the presentation.
Thank you, Chief. Here's a feel for what we found when we looked to see how Ottawa Police stacks up against other police services with respect to personnel levels. The data that we brought here is Stats Canada data, and it's the latest that's available. So it shows 2016 strength, which are people at work or people in permanent positions, people in permanent positions, and it compares it to population data from the previous year. What we find is this creates something called the population per police member. And what it tells us right now is that in Ottawa, each of our police members, both civilian and sworn, there are 521 persons that each of those members support. You'll see that we fall kind of to the bottom of the ranking of the 12 larger municipal services that we looked at. And we went back in time to see where we were. So in 2011, when we stopped our increasing staffing plan, we were actually at 479 residents supported by a police member. So we would have then been in the middle of the ranking. We're closer to the lower part of the ranking. And this data, it's in a good baseline because it shows 2016, which is the first year that we started adding 25 officers to the complement. But we can see that taking that gap has had an impact on how we stack up against the rest of the country.
And Mr. Chair, that's why you'll see in the budget for our outlying a 3-year plan from 2019 to 2021. We've got a projected increase of hiring 90 new sworn officers, so 30 each year. We're presenting that in order to make sure that we maintain our police to population member benchmark at the level that we're at now. The goal is to invest in frontline community policing from a resource perspective. We want to increase the capacity that we have in dealing with violence against women and gun violence. We also want to address some of the shortages as a result of increases from long-term absences and accommodation issues. And also we continue to hear from our community some trends that we want to put focus on, whether it's traffic complaints and traffic safety, deal with the increase in mental health calls for service, the impact of the legalization of cannabis, and also to respond to the opioid crisis, which in our estimation is still increasing and will be something that we have to deal with as a city for a number of years.
Yeah, keep going. Mr. Chair, we'll use this next group of slides to show you how the choices, or outline the choices that we made to achieve the 2% budget, which is our first message. We met the board's direction and council's direction on the 2% budget. And we'll start out then with identifying the highlights of what's in the 2018 budget. So as the chief pointed out, this is the 3rd year and the final year of the 75 officer program. We'll be adding 25 additional sworn positions to the police service in 2018. We addressed $4 million worth of financial risk that was coming out of the 2017 operating results. So what you know through the quarterly reports this year, we've been identifying that LTD and WSIB, which are indicators of the stress and wellness within the organization, those costs increased by just over $1 million in 2017. Overtime is at about a $2 million, we added $2 million to that to help offset that risk, and it's an indicator of the workload we face within the police service. Our legal claims and settlements are also above budget, so we've added just under $1 million for those to cover that risk. So in total, we took first a risk mitigation approach to the budget and included provisions of $4 million to address those financial risks. There's $6.6 million of revenue expected to come from the background check fee proposal we're bringing to you. We've realigned our fees or have a proposal model around that. We'll bring you that in the new year to see if that's agreeable to you. We've also found, and you'll see there's about $1.5 million of new programs that we've introduced by moving funds around within the existing budget base. So for example, we're going to bring you an evidence-based approach to and propose an expansion of the conducted energy weapon program. The pilot results show that we significantly reduced the time for a taser to be on site and involved in an incident. It moved from 14 minutes to 7 minutes, but we're gathering evidence that shows that it's a game changer operationally, both for the officer and the individual involved, if the taser is available immediately. So we've included a provision in the budget for that. We'll bring you the evidence-based business case to demonstrate the value of that, and then it's up to the board to decide what to action. We've also included funding for the multi-year action plan on bias-neutral policing. That's a follow-on to the work we did through the race-based traffic stop. As the chief said, cannabis legalization and the opioid crisis have shifted our budget significantly. We're preparing the tools and equipment needed to deal with the police role in cannabis, and the opioid crisis for us, that means continued emphasis on naloxone and training. The recruiting program, we brought you a new approach to diversifying the workforce a month ago. We'll be adding more of the details to that program so you can approve that for us going forward. And we've constructed a 2018 gender program following our meeting last week with the Human Rights Commission that will come to the HR committee next week. This is the slide that helps to highlight the 5 key financial facts about the budget. So we put them in one place to help clarify just at a high numbers level some of the metrics. So the most important one, the police tax rate, is at 2%. That means, compared to last year, that we've had an $8.5 million increase in our budget. So tax dollars have increased by $8.5 million to us. Our net operating budget, so the gross one minus the revenue that's generated internally, we're just under $300 million now as a net operating budget. For the average homeowner, that means an increase of $12, and it would bring their tax bill, the police tax rate bill, to $603. In the development of the budget, this is the pressure that we face. So we've talked about what went in the budget. This is what we actually kind of start to finish had to do to get to that end point. When we opened up the budget and through some of our discussions, there were pressures of roughly $10.8 million on the table. The solutions are kind of the 6 ones that we've outlined here. We had a look at the new requests and pretty much moved all of them off of the table. So $2.2 million worth of pressure was eliminated by saying no to a range of new requests. We had planned a $1.1 million increase to the funding for our capital projects under the roadmap, our modernization roadmap. We have eliminated that and looked to moving funding between 2 reserve funds to help pay for the roadmap. We actually had to reduce the existing pay-as-you-go contribution for our facilities strategic plan by $3.9 million. You'll see that the impact of that is we've had to use some more debt to finance capital. We've reduced the balance in the reserve funds to lower levels, but quite acceptable ones. But we've also managed to keep all the projects on track. Within the existing budget base, we moved $1.5 million worth of priorities aside to make room for the new things I spoke about on the previous slide. The service initiative is winding down. That created $1.2 million worth of budget room. And we took $0.9 million worth of one-time projects and used some existing, repurposed some existing capital funds to cover that. So I want to assure people there's no magic to these kind of budgets. They require a progressive, innovative, and robust approach, and those are the 6 steps we took to deal with that $10.8 million worth of pressure, but also create new room for what we saw on the previous slide.
Okay, thank you, Deborah. I will now walk you through some of the details of the budget. The OPS has a requirement for $8.5 million of new funding in 2018, and the details are summarized in the table on slide 14. Maintaining existing service levels requires a $5.5 million increase. This is net of the $3.9 million reduction to the Facility Strategic Plan pay-as-you-go contribution that Deborah just identified on the previous slide. Excluding this pay-as-you-go reduction, the maintained services requirement would be $9.4 million, which mainly reflects increases to compensation based on the collective agreement, as well as increases for overtime, LTD, and WSIB, as previously identified. The 25 officer growth requires a $2.6 million increase. This amount is comprised of $2.1 million in total compensation costs, along with $500,000 in non-compensation costs to cover equipment, training, and vehicles. The modernization roadmap requires $900,000 of increase to cover the increased operating costs from the new systems that are being implemented and brought on board from Bundle 1 deliverables. The $600,000 in efficiencies in 2018 reflects the increase in revenue from the background clearance checks that Deborah previously identified, and as identified, a new fee structure proposal will be presented to the board in the near future. And finally, user fees and revenues are down $100,000, mainly due to a $200,000 reduction to revenue from the sale of vehicle collision reports. This is year 2 of a 5-year plan to bring the budget for collision reporting revenue in line with actual results. All other user fees are increasing by 2%. The OPS gross budget breaks down as follows. The gross operating budget is $330 million, revenue of $35.7 million, bringing the net operating budget to $294.3 million. The pie chart at the bottom of the slide breaks down the gross operating budget by type of expense. And as you can see, 82% or $271 million relates to compensation costs. 8% or $27 million is required for materials, supplies, and services. 6% or $20 million is made up of financial charges that reflect pay-as-you-go contributions to reserve funds and debt servicing costs. And the remaining 11 million or 4% are costs incurred from the city and are mainly facility operating costs and fleet maintenance costs.
Mr. Chair, here's what lies ahead, and this is part of what we do each year to help identify the current term financial situation, but also what's in the forecast. And you'll see for the 2019-21 period, we're forecasting that the police tax rate would be in the range of 3.5% to just over 4%. There are 3 key things that amount is funding. In addition to our program, our general program, you'll see the impact of the 30 positions that the chief spoke about in the opening slides. That's in the range of $3 to $3.5 million annually. We continue the modernization roadmap through that period as well. It starts to drop off as we see more of the financial benefits accruing to and reducing the operating impact of the roadmap. User fees will also increase according to our budget requirement, which is about 2% per year. If you compared us to previous years, you would see that we're not identifying a specific efficiency line. What we've done to date, or since 2012, we've gained about $13.4 million worth of efficiencies by working at it, or revenue increases by working at it each year. And we think that's tailing off. Where we will expect to see efficiencies are through the efforts and the new tools we put in place through the modernization roadmap, and where those financial benefits occur, we'll use them to directly offset the cost of the new IT plant. So that's why the modernization roadmap line goes from $1.3 million downward. So we won't in future be showing a separate efficiencies line.
2018 is a big capital year for the OPS, with $65.7 million worth of capital projects. This is the largest year of capital the OPS has had in quite some time. And the capital budget breaks down into 3 categories in 2018. Renewal of assets requires $5.6 million for fleet, facility lifecycle, and IT infrastructure. The growth category requires $44.7 million for the new south facility on Lodge Road. This will be entirely funded with debt. There was also $30 million set aside in previous budgets, bringing the total Phase 1 project close to $75 million. The strategic initiatives category is $15.6 million and reflects the modernization roadmap, along with facility work plan and other initiatives. Now, funding sources for the capital reflect 68% debt, 31.5% pay-as-you-go contributions, and the remainder revenue. This is a little unusual for OPS to have such a high percentage of funding from debt, however, is entirely acceptable and in line with city practices and guidelines for debt levels. Now, looking at the 10-year capital forecast, the 10-year requirement for OPS capital spending is $286 million and ranges from a high of $66 million in 2018 to a low of $12 million in 2026. Renewal of assets requires $75 million of capital for fleet replacement, facility lifecycle, and IT renewal. These projects are financed with pay-as-you-go funding largely, as well as a small amount of revenue from the sale of assets. The growth category requires $92.5 million and funds the South Facility Phase 1 and Phase 2. The South project is mainly funded with debt. Strategic initiatives require $118 million, and the major projects within this category are the modernization roadmap, as well as the new central patrol facility as identified in the facility strategic plan. Funding for this category is 50% debt and 50% pay-as-you-go. Overall, funding for the 10-year capital program is 51% pay-as-you-go, 48% debt, and 1% revenue. Moving along to the timetable, we're here today tabling the budget. The next meeting is November 20th, the Finance and Audit Committee meeting, followed by the board meeting on November 27th, and City Council approval of the budget on December 13th. And with that, Mr. Chair, that brings the presentation to a close, and we're happy to take any questions the board may have.
Well, thank you very much, Director General and the team and Chief. And so today is just the tabling of the budget. So if there's any high-level question, we'll entertain. But keep in mind, this is the first time we've seen the budget. And any detailed question, I would invite all my colleagues on the board and all my colleagues on council and the media to attend our Finance and Audit Committee meeting. That's when we're going to have more of a frank discussion and also engage in more with the, so with that, I'll turn it to Member Smallwood.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is just really a confirmation. I see under projects, I don't see any mention of the diversity audit. So I'm assuming it's under the MYAP, but on pages 8 and 11, I didn't see it mentioned. So I just wondered if you can confirm where funding for that diversity audit will be. Thank you.
Mr. Chair, it is included in the MYAP, the multi-year action plan. It's one of the components for diversity audit, and we do have some funding aside for the entire multi-year plan.
Thank you, Member Smallwood. Member Hubley.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I noticed, Chief, at least two references in there to the pending cannabis legislation. Is these costs that you're putting into this budget, are they strictly training costs, or are they training and enforcement?
Mr. Chair, without knowing the details of what funding announcements the province may make with respect to supplying municipalities or police services with funding, we've earmarked $500,000 to deal with training of our officers and also any equipment purchases that we may require to do in order to enforce the new aspects of the legislation.
So we're expecting to recoup the costs?
I can't answer that, Mr. Chair. Certainly, chiefs across the province have indicated that they would advocated that they want some funding in order to offset the equipment and the training as a result of the new legislation. But there hasn't been any announcement yet from the province to indicate exactly if municipalities and police services will get access to any funding.
Thank you. My next one would be with the overtime costs that are identified here. I'm assuming that there's steps being taken to reduce these overtime costs?
Absolutely, Mr. Chair. What we have seen over the past 2 years is a trend upwards, and there were some policy decisions that were made in order to respect the collective agreement and change in past practices, which where we saw an increase in actual overtime. So we're confident what we're seeing now are the real overtime costs associated with the police operating the police service. So we've adjusted our base budget by $2 million. We're introducing technology so that all our managers have real-time access to overtime figures and giving them tools to be able to better manage overtime. So there have been a number of steps taken to give our managers tools, and we're also going to leverage technology.
And final question for you is I know when we talk about, and this may go to either you or Ms. Fraser, I'll leave it up to you. We talk about the savings or finding the efficiencies so that we don't have to have big tax increases. That's what we're doing across the city. I'm noticing the efficiencies that you're finding within the police budget tend to be one-time savings versus long-term savings. And I'm wondering, you're showing in this document you're hoping for a 4.1 increase in 2019, and that has not been the trend around the city. So I'm just wondering what we're going to do here. Is clearly when you come to table a budget in 2019, I don't think you're realistically hoping to get 4.1.
Mr. Chair, actually the savings that we found since 2012, we have found over $13 million of savings and efficiencies, which they were not one-time costs. They were savings that offset some increases in our budgets. As the Director General indicated, that we initially identified potentially $2 million worth of efficiencies going forward. We realized that those efficiencies have tailed off. The efficiencies that we've identified and that the board is aware of through the modernization roadmap are long-term savings and not one-times. And I'll ask the DG to clarify or add to those comments.
On a high level, Deborah, please.
Thank you. Perhaps it would be best if Jeff and I met with Councillor Hubley. Councillor, there's in the budget document on page 66, there's a listing of all the efficiencies from the start from 2012, and maybe we can go through those with you and identify what's ongoing and what was more transitory. But for the most part, it's been ongoing, and I think that's probably a better discussion for us.
Great. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Member Hubley. Member Nicholson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have sort of two questions. One is, I'm curious to know, I noticed that the compensation costs are about 82% of the budget, and I guess the question I have is that going up or down? What's the direction of flow of that? And what can we anticipate?
I'll take that one, Deborah. Thank you. The compensation costs are rising at approximately 2% a year. As a percentage of the budget, it's increasing.
It's increased.
Slightly.
Okay, thank you. And I mean, over time, is that the trend?
That's been the trend over time.
Okay, thank you. My other question is about debt and the reserves. I mean, you mentioned that the new build is going to be financed from debt, and you said it was acceptable. And if you can elaborate on that acceptability for me.
Can you move the slides back to the breakdown of the capital and the funding? Go to the 20. What we see here, and as Jeff said, this is a more unusual financing picture for us, because our approach is pay for things as you have money in the bank, and that's what the pay-as-you-go essentially means. So where we've had renewal of assets, we pay for those with money that we already have in the bank. The board contributes a contribution from operating over to the capital project, and we pay for them as we have money. And you'll see that's the main funding source for that renewal of assets, which makes sense. When you renew assets, you don't issue debt. You use funds on hand to do them. Same thing primarily with the strategic initiatives. So about $20 million of our $65 million is coming from money the board has already saved up. When you build a building, it's the acceptable practice from a financing perspective to finance a 20 to 30 year asset with we would say a mortgage if it was our own house. That does a bunch of things. It spreads the costs of the building across the whole group that will enjoy it and be in the city for the next 20 to 30 years. It's how assets are typically financed. So for us, when we put the $44.7 million in this year's budget, we put in the matching debt. And that's, if you went back to last year's budget, you would see that our pay-as-you-go was 98% of our funding approach, because we were in renewal assets and strategic initiatives. The introduction of the building introduces debt, and the conversations we have with the city treasurer is about the length of the debt and when to issue the debt. So you'll see this kind of shift in approach as we bring on more of the facilities. You'll see more debt in our budget, and it's to be expected.
Okay, thank you, Member Nicholson. Any other member from my colleague? So I have a few questions. You don't even have to answer me them right now, but I'd like to bring the information to the Finance and Audit Committee. On slide 8, when we talk about where we are in population per police member, I'd like to know the other city comparison to us, or comparing to us, they have the same number of civilians than we do? Because in our organization, we have 2 to 1, 2 sworn to 1 civilian. I'd like to know if the comparison is matching. On page 12, we talk about the budget increase. And I know in the budget book, we talk about the growth assessment, which is 1.3. Can you tell me 1% in police budget increase, how much that will translate to? Jeff or Deborah?
Yeah, that would be, it's approximately 2.6 million.
2.6 million, 1%. Mm-hmm. So the 8.5 million increase, Deborah, is that include the 1.3? That's it. So
yes,
that's
Mr. Chair.
Because that doesn't show anywhere. It just show 8.5 increase, but it doesn't identify the 2% tax increase plus the 1.3 growth assessment increase. Because growth is supposed to go to growth, actually, but we're using it as a part of the budget lately. So. And Deborah, one more question, if I may. The 25 officers we identify on slide 14, I assume you're talking about the new 25 hire. Why we're budgeting 2.6 million? Because when we first hired those officers, they don't cost us like $100,000 per person. So why the estimated cost is almost $100,000? Because it takes 3 years to reach that level.
You're very correct, Mr. Chair. So the 2.1 million, so 500,000 of that 2.6 relates to training, equipment, as well as vehicles. There's 2.1 million related to total compensation. 1.1 is related to the hires in 2018.
Okay.
And $1 million relates to the incremental increase for the hires from the previous year.
Okay, that's great to hear. But here it says new officer, basically you're budgeting 2.6. I find it a little bit higher.
Well, Mr. Chair, what we try to do is to present from the 3-year hiring plan, the 75 officers, and show that cost associated with those 75 on a year-to-year basis. And when that's over, we'll roll it over to just the regular budget.
And Deborah, I'm not sure if you have the answer today, but the $2 million we sign up with the federal government, we still receive that with no, it become part of our budget, basically.
That's correct, Mr. Chair. You'll see it in our revenue base, and we do an audit, a very rigorous audit with the federal government every year on where those funds go, because they're directed specifically to activities that relate to policing the nation's capital.
Okay, so, Mr. Smallwood, as usual.
I do apologize. I just wanted to add to your request, not today, for next